Okay, so now that we're at spoilers, let me talk about Jane Foster. Okay, when I read and heard that Jane Foster was going to be the new Thor, I had questions. How does she exactly become worthy in the eyes of Mjolnir? What exactly did she do to deserve? Like, what did she do to deserve that? How are they gonna do the plot line between Thor and Jane Foster? Is it gonna be a Mary Sue situation essentially, where she is because she is woman and that's that? That's not what happened in this movie, but it's not that better, to be completely honest. So basically, the conceit of the film is that Jane Foster's dying of cancer. She has stage 4 cancer, and doesn't have much time. But she reads a book that tells her that Mjolnir can give great health to the person who's wearing it. And that leads her to seek out Mjolnir in New Asgard to get the hammer and to, I guess, feel better without dealing with her dying of cancer. And that's interesting. That was an interesting, I think, kind of way of marrying her to the hammer. But then it asks the question, what exactly did she do to deserve it? And I think they could have went somewhere with it by saying something along the lines of, well, she was willing to sacrifice her health to make the world a better place. And that could have worked. And that really could have actually worked very well, but they didn't go that route. They actually didn't go into any specific explanation as to why the hammer picked her. It did. And that's it. So I was like, okay, fine, I guess. But it's those who are basically saying this is a Mary Sue situation. I do have to disagree with that, mainly because in a Mary Sue situation, they wouldn't explain anything. They wouldn't give her any weaknesses. They would make her all strengths and essentially make her a boring character, which she's not. She's not a boring character. It's an interesting character where basically you find out throughout the film that the hammer's killing her to a certain extent. I mean, and they could have done a lot more with that. And they exposition dumped that fact that the hammer is essentially killing her. Basically, there's no dramatic kind of storytelling that tells you what the hammer is essentially doing to her and what her internal monologue and feelings are as to why she's doing this. And it kind of hurts the character to a certain extent, and that's unfortunate. It really is, because it would have been really interesting, and it could have been done really well to have, I guess, her character, for her character go through this whole arc throughout the film. And it would have, and I think it would have been done well, in fact, if, like, I'll put it this way. If they did what people were worried about in this movie and made Thor Odinson, Chris Hemsworth, the side character, and Jane Foster's character to be the main focus, the one that drives the film throughout, I kind of would have been fine with that, because then we would get to learn more about maybe the hammer's effects and what this does to actual human beings and stuff like that. Like, I think I would have been strangely okay with that. But they didn't go that route, and they kind of half-assed it throughout the way, and it hurt. It hurt the character of Jane Foster. It hurt the end, because you were supposed to have this really dramatic thing that happens in the film. Well, spoilers. Well, Jane Foster dies at the end of the movie, and you're supposed to have this really emotional reaction to what happened to her, and I didn't get that. I didn't feel that emotional reaction. And it's also mainly because of what they decided to do what they decided to do in terms of tone in the film. Because they would go absolute slapstick wacky and then suddenly deathly serious with no in between. It would ping pong back and forth. It didn't fit real well in this. And I would understand if, to a certain extent, maybe, if they just went more comedic and had a more comedic villain on top. Like, but then you can't have these ultra serious tones and ultra serious things like Jane Foster dying of cancer and Gore and his issue with killing gods and why he wants to. Those need more time and more of a serious, how do I put this? They need more time and they need more of a serious investment to flesh them out and make them believable and make them, in a sense, enjoyable, or not maybe enjoyable, but give them the impact that story and that character deserved. I think they shortchanged Jane Foster in the end, which I found honestly kind of strange because they made a huge deal about this in the run-up, that she was going to be the mighty Thor, and this is the female Thor, and this is the future, and this and that, and they bungled it big time in this. I feel, at least. I know there's people who are fans of this, but I feel they bungled that chance in this, and they could have made her admittedly tragic story into a very memorable story that could, in the end, made Thor a more compelling character. But I really feel they messed that up. And because they messed it up, and because they didn't stick the landing very well, it's going to be weird when they do another Thor movie, when they have to also balance that he also lost the love of his life. My feeling is, unless they go another different route with Thor, which they might, they may just forget about it to a certain extent, not even get into it, which again would just hurt the character of Thor, and that would not be good in that situation. I mentioned Christian Bale's performance is good as Gore, but they didn't give much screen time to his character, and that, I think, that also hurt the villain and hurt the movie overall, because you get this feeling of how much of a monster this person is. But the most compelling villains, I mean, except for someone like the Joker, the most compelling villains are the ones that you identify with to a certain extent. And you get the one scene where you understand Gore's motivation, but you don't get much more out of that. And they just go into classic movie monster territory with Gore, which is a shame, because you have this really talented actor in Christian Bale playing, and I'll be honest, I've never heard of Gore until they announced this movie, but it seemed like an interesting different type of villain they could have went with, but they missed the mark on this. I think they missed the mark pretty badly. When we finally meet Russell Crowe's Zeus, man, do I have to tell you how badly this is directed in this. I don't know if the accent was Russell Crowe's decision, or if it was the decision of the writer or director, or which is Taika Waititi, but man, did they blow that. They turned Zeus from someone who is supposed to be incredibly intimidating and one of the most powerful gods out there into a freaking goofball, into a flubby, disgusting goofball. And I get, to a certain extent, that's the tone of the movie. It's supposed to be taken much less seriously. But then you're told that this is one of the most powerful gods out there. Why then turn him into that, to a certain extent? Again, that's more of a problem of execution. And that's like the whole problem with the movie. The execution's bad. The execution just didn't work. The comedy and the over-reliance of it just didn't fit well with this. Because, and I'll end it with this, with the spoilers. Thor is supposed to be a serious character. He is. And what made Ragnarok work very well is they took this very serious character and sprinkled personality and humor into it, but still kept him as the character he is in the movie. And that's what made Thor, to me, that's what made Thor Ragnarok work. Now, I haven't seen Thor Ragnarok in about 4 years. I might be misremembering things. I might be wrong. We'll see. But in this, they turned him more and more into a goofy caricature like hero. Like, they kind of turned him into, well, Star-Lord to a certain extent. If Star-Lord was a god, this is what Thor is, essentially. And it did not work at all. And I think that does a graver disservice to the character than anything. If they're going to continue using Thor in the MCU, which actually is another question I might have, maybe they shouldn't continue using Thor. Maybe they should put him to the side for a little while until they can come up with something a lot better. Since, if I heard correctly, Taika Waititi is not doing another Thor movie, which I think might be the best decision in this. But I think they had a decent grounding of the character. They had a template to use. But then they threw away the template and said, well, people like this, so we'll just give them all of that. When really, that's not exactly what happened. They liked what they did, but they liked the in my opinion, they liked that they sprinkled it on, that they put little bits of that comedic flair and touch in it, instead of basically bombarding you with the comedic bits, which I don't think a lot of people were asking for, and I wasn't really asking for either. It could have worked if they executed it properly, but they just didn't, and it just fell flat. And yeah, that's it on that one. So now that we're done with the spoilers, I'll get to my final thoughts. Thor: Love and Thunder is, I rated it already on my Letterboxd for the best MCU movies. It is now the second worst MCU movie that I've seen. Only the one that's lowest is Thor: The Dark World, which was awful. It had a bunch of tonal problems. The subplots they had were not fleshed out enough. Thor's turned into something wildly different, which doesn't really fit Thor very well, and it doesn't fit Chris Hemsworth's interpretation and performance of Thor. So then that's an issue. The look and feel of the movie's okay, but it goes in stark contrast of what's going on. The best way to put the visual motif is color vomit, I would say. It's really colorful. It's like a oh God, is it it's not Anne Frank. It's shit. It reminds me of those Trapper Keeper type of folders that girls in like the early 80s and 90s used to have, that were really colorful with unicorns, a lot of pink and bright blue and bright green and stuff like that. It's something Frank, and I'm missing it, and I'm sorry, but the color motif that they gave through the film reminds me of that specifically, and it just felt wildly off. Like, I watched it and went, why? Why is this colorful? What's the point of this? And there was really no point of it other than it was crazy and colorful. So I had those issues as well. Good performances by the actors, even though they weren't given a lot to deal with. The character, I think they really bungled Jane Foster in this. Like, if they were going to turn her into the tragic character that they were really gunning for, they needed to spend more time on her. And they just didn't. And the movie suffered because of that. Out of 5, I gave it 1.5 stars. Again, it's the second worst MCU movie that I have seen. And it's a shame, because Thor Ragnarok was very good, I thought. I think Thor Ragnarok is like number 8 in the best MCU movies, in my opinion. But to go down that far, it is a travesty. And either they're going to have to reboot Thor once again in the next movie, or, in my opinion, they should just stop and just say, okay, maybe enough Thor this time. We'll get to him maybe in like 5 or 6 years, or 7 or 8 years. We'll do that instead. We'll see, though. But Would I recommend it? No, I wouldn't. Even if you're a diehard MCU fan, and if you are, I'm sorry, you're going to watch it anyway. I really would not recommend this at all.